this is such a wonderful event for me, not only because my dream of talking to Allegra Goodman has finally come true, but what a wonderful conversation partner that we have, co-conversation partner, and Julie Bear. I've always dreamed of having an event where we also talked with an agent, and she is an agent extraordinaire at the book group. Her clients have been winners and finalists for prizes, including the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the Booker Prize. And they are both here and their sound works. And I wanted to welcome you. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
We would like to start with a few words from our author and maybe a few pages read to remind people that this is a bookstore event and we love reading.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you. Please come to Cambridge. I'll take you to all the local bookstores. I know where to get good coffee. You don't have to wait another 26 years, Daniel. And I just so appreciate your support and your support of all of these writers that you've mentioned. You know, you're right in the thick of it. Reading, selling, supporting, spreading the word. It's awesome. Boswell would be proud of you.
I will say there is no bookseller like Daniel. I mean, he reads everything I send him. He always has a kind word about. I mean, Dan, you are just, I want to take a moment and say thank you so much for doing this event, for being such a supporter of authors of all kinds from all over, and just being a true champion of books. And that's what makes independent bookstores so special. So thank you.
It's true.
Oh, he muted himself.
He's muting. So
I did it. I was like, oh, maybe I'll make noise. So I was like, you're too kind. I don't deserve it. But
now, okay. Now you can read. Sorry, we all interrupted you. Like,
no worries. So this is my book, Sam, and it is a bookstore event. So I will just tell you that the way the book is structured is it starts out with very simple language, and because Sam is very young when the book starts, she's 7 years old, and the book, as the book goes on, the language and the voice of the book evolves as she does, as she grows. And that's one of the fun things about it. It's sort of with the Richard Linklater film, the filmmaker filmed a young boy when he started, 7 or 8, and then kept coming back every year and filming him and the other actors so that you can actually see in the movie how they grow and change and age. In my book, Sam grows, except I do it with words instead of pictures, because I'm a writer. And that was part of the fun of this book, just the way her voice evolves. And so I'll just read the first page and a half and give you a sense of that kind of inner voice, that voice of the book, which is her perception when she's just a very young child. And it was funny, I read from the opening of the book at one of the bookstores here in Cambridge, and the owner had read the book before and said that he said it was just like when you have a child and you're like, you look at an old picture and you say, wow, she was so little, she was so young. And because he'd read to the end of the book and then he heard me read from the first page and he was like, oh, she's so little, she's so young, which was a really sweet thing to say. But this is just the opening of the book, so you get a sense of her. There is a girl and her name is Sam. She has a mother named Courtney and a dad who is sort of around, sort of not. He lives 10 minutes away, but he is not always home. Courtney says that's the whole point. What is? Sam asks. He's never anywhere. Yes, he is. He's somewhere. Very funny, Courtney says. Sam is 7 and she never stops. She never helps either. Courtney is exhausted all the time. But it's not just Sam, it's Noah. Noah is 2 and he has a teddy named Bill. He got a plastic ark for his birthday, but he only has 1 lion and 1 zebra left. You can't teach Noah. You can't even scare him. He thinks Noah is his name. Sam climbs up inside the door jambs to get away from him. If you want to know how, just take off your socks and your shoes. You have to be barefoot. Stand in the doorway in the kitchen and spread your feet as far apart as they can go. Wedge your feet into the frame. Inch 1 foot up, then the other. Inch up some more. Stop. or you'll bang your head. Just stay there. Raise your feet against the wood. Courtney says, you know what, Sam? This is getting old, because Sam likes to stay up there so long. It is not cute. The day her dad comes over, Sam tackles him. Where were you? Are you back? When did you get back? Before he can answer, she wedges herself into the doorframe. Hey, monkey, her dad says. When did you learn to do that? Courtney frowns. A long time ago. He just looks up at Sam. Ready? Yes. Okay, let's go. Sam jumps down on him. Where? I don't know. He's teasing, but she doesn't care. He's a jet. He's a plane. He's a parachute. He holds Sam by the heels, and pennies start falling from her clothes. She is raining pennies that were never there before. But that's what happens with her dad. So that's just the beginning.
That's Sam. How can you not love her already?
Why don't you take the first question, Julie?
Okay. Allegra, I feel like this is a really different book for you. You've written a lot of novels and stories about big families or women with big careers or romantic relationships, but I feel like Sam comes from a background that's really different than you've written about before and has this very singular original voice, right? This idea that you embody her as kind of this innocent young girl and then follow her as she gets older and her voice evolves. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the inspiration behind Sam, and then also what it was like to write a different kind of book. It's not your first book, you know?
Yeah, thank you. So I had a couple different inspirations. One inspiration was just in terms of, you make a good point about how she's a young girl and she grows up without a lot of privilege. Many of my characters, they're scientists, or they're highly educated, or they're, sort of movers and shakers, they're tech moguls, or, they're professors. Sam is, her mom is a single mom. She is much more working class background. She is on the North Shore of Massachusetts, in a small town called Beverly. And she doesn't have a lot of those advantages. She's not homeless or anything like that, but she has some challenges in her life. And I was interested in writing about somebody like that. And I got the idea for doing that because I started spending a lot of time up on the North Shore when I was driving my son up to school there. It's about an hour north of where I live. It's a reverse commute, but it would have been insane to come back home in between. So I stayed up on the North Shore for the whole school day, worked up there, rented a little office up there actually, and worked up there, and then drove him home when school went out. And I spent a lot of time sort of exploring that area. And I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is like home of Harvard, home of MIT, home of a lot of different colleges, very academic, lots of high tech here, lots of biotech here. Mm-hmm. Beverly is a town with, has some very affluent people who have houses on the beach. And it's also a town which is much more working class and, has different kinds of people there. And I started exploring this town, looking at the YMCA, the library, the beauty salon. It's a small town. There's not a lot there. The ocean, which is right near there. And I started thinking about the people who live there and started thinking about setting a book there. And then the idea for Sam the girl, I think really a lot of it came from having a daughter of my own. I have 4 children. I have 3 sons, and then I had a daughter. And my 3 sons were sort of like very bookish kids. They read all the time. They're all bookworms. They read all the time. They were kind of well behaved. If you turned your back on them and you looked again, they'd still be there, a few seconds later. So then I had a daughter and she would not be there, and she did not like to read. She wouldn't read a book. And so, we'd all be sitting around, like each of us in a different couch or different chair. And she'd be like, what is wrong with you people? She'd be like, sort of, let's get this party started. What are you wasting your lives reading books? I even remember when she also, in the way that youngest children like to define themselves in opposition to their siblings, she was just like, I'm not the reader. And I even remember not having a babysitter and taking her to an event where I gave a talk, and she actually said to the head of Penn New England, "I hate books." You know, she was like 7. I was like, yeah, this is my daughter Miranda. I'm so proud. So yeah, so she was always like climbing up the doorway and like literally like give her Sharpie. Like I hid all the markers. Like she drew on the walls, she drew on her legs,
Right.
She cut her own hair in kindergarten. She took the scissors out of the art table and locked herself in the bathroom and cut her hair, which she has actually later explained to me was because she had a temporary tattoo on her forehead that she wanted people to be able to see better.
Fair
But you
enough.
know, she was that
Yes.
kind of kid. So I started thinking about sort of girlhood and what it's like to be a girl. Like she was just like full of energy. And I remembered being a child at that age, although I was more like my sons, much more bookish. But I do remember being a little girl, like maybe in kindergarten, and wondering why adults always seem so sluggish and exhausted all the time. They're always like, they always
have children.
they walked around saying they were tired all the time. My parents were always tired all the time.
Yeah.
You know, like she says about her mom, you know, her mom is exhausted. And it was sort of like no self-respecting little kid will walk from one place to another place. They always run. And adults, they never run. They always walk. And if they're in a hurry, maybe they start sort of trotting a little bit, but they never. And I remember as a little kid wondering what happened to people, you know, why did they slow down so much when they got older?
You figure it out?
Well, yeah, I figured it out. So let's just say that Sam's long-suffering mother, I also very much relate to her. And so I started thinking about it, sort of where does that energy go? As an adult, I started thinking about it, especially for girls.
Specifically.
A little girl like that, the sky's the limit. She thinks she can do anything. She thinks that there are no obstacles in her, that she can't climb over, literally. And then life happens. And you know, what happens to those young women as they get older? And where does that go? Where does the self-doubt come in? And the fear that creeps in. And of course, there's our sick culture that creeps in on us, and the way men treat women and the way women treat each other, and all of those things that she then has to learn. And I got really interested in writing about that. And Julie, you're right that it's a very different kind of book for me, in that in this book in particular, like I really delve deep into one perspective. And a lot of my other books, I've really enjoyed multiple points of view and that sort of polyphony in the novel. I've definitely written short stories that are just all from the perspective of one person, but to write a novel, just really all you see is what Sam sees, and what you feel is what she feels.
I'm just curious, did you have a temptation to add, did you ever write another voice in and like, oh, I got to take this out?
I thought about it. I committed pretty deeply to her. And in some ways it felt risky also, because the reader has to know that it's from her point of view. And so it's not that I don't know better, you know, that when I don't want to give away stuff in the book, but you know, certain things happen to her and she blames herself. And if I were the narrator, could step in there and say, but of course it wasn't her fault. Or I could have another adult point of view say, you know, she thought this, but this isn't really what happened. But we are really with her all the time. So so it felt risky, but also necessary. And I think, you know, with any narrative strategy, there's sort of advantages and disadvantages. And the advantage is this sort of tremendous intimacy in the book. Instead of having the multiple voices, that I have her own voice, which evolves, and this sort of her perception, which opens as the book develops. So it's like an aperture that is opening. And so I was very interested in that and very absorbed in that. And that definitely sustained me in writing this book. But you're right, it's a departure. Definitely a different kind of thinking and writing.
You know, it's such a part, you know, at first it was, you know, when I started reading the book, I'm like, oh, goodness gracious. And I stopped for a while and someone said, no, keep going. And as I've mentioned to a few people I wrote about on the blog, you know, our sales rep, John, said, you got to go back to that book. And I'm like, okay. And yeah, so a big thank you to him, because it was so worth it. But there, especially then thinking about all your other books, there is a little through line in terms of, like, it reminded me a little of, Elizabeth from Catskill Falls. And then I started also thinking about what you said about the way you think about language in how the book is written. And one of the things that really obsessed me at the time was Catskill Falls versus Paradise, the next
Park.
book,
Paradise Park.
Elizabeth versus Sharon, and just the way the stories were almost talking to each other. The way
God,
one.
you're like my ideal reader. He knows everything. Yes. You're right, Daniel. Very few people notice that. It's like Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience. They go together. Those are bookends. People didn't read it that way at the time, but that's exactly right.
Yeah, well, of course, I didn't know when I was reading Catskill Falls, but when I read, and of course, you might have said, no, wasn't trying to do that. And of course,
oh no,
language,
I was totally trying to do that. Yeah.
The book is a conversation, and the reader picks up whatever they pick up. But but especially, and you've always talked about, you've always touched on faith, and I love the way that one of those books kind of grew, like she went from the faith to kind of the world, and the other person went from the world and went into
the faith.
Yes.
So great. And this, I saw that in this book as well, the way that reflects back on this book where you open the story up. And I kind of love that. I just want to say a little shout out, just because you have written a lot about Jewish culture and sometimes very heavily, sometimes lightly, but I just love the wink in this story, like, oh, it turns out that she's part Jewish. It's just such
thrown in there.
Yeah.
Just throw that out there.
Yeah, she's just having this casual conversation. She goes, Hallie, her friend is Jewish, and she goes, she gets presents for 8 nights, and her dad's like, yeah, I'm Jewish, and she goes, you didn't tell me that, and I don't get presents. Where are my presents? And he's like, I'm non-practicing. Like,
yeah.
Let it not be said that this is not a
Jewish
but Daniel,
you're right. I think you're right. I think it's like also her spirituality, her faith is almost like her faith in the world, right? And her faith in other people. And I think there's a very spiritual relationship between her and nature in this book, right?
Oh yeah.
I think that her connection with the outdoors, and when she discovers not just climbing, but like being outside and climbing outside and driving outside, that freedom when she gets the car, like that's a faith and a religion for her.
Absolutely. Yeah. And her development is a spiritual development.
Yeah.
Very much so. She has, she goes through a lot actually in her youth in this short period.
I wanted to say,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead. No.
I thought it was interesting that, like, Daniel, you stopped and then somebody encouraged you to go on with, that was my fear writing this book. I felt risky. Like, will people open it up and think it's a children's book, or like they'll be like, what is this? And it takes time to see the arc in a way. So that was my fear.
Now I've taken on the job of John, and I will be the person that says, keep going, the cheerleader. It's not that unusual. At least Julie and I were actually talking about this with another book where it's a wonderful book, still life, but it has a slow start. And it takes about, as one of my book-selling colleagues in another store said, the first 100 pages is Kansas. Like, it just takes a while to get to Oz. And, some of the best books in the world need that, because you need the buildup. Like, if you didn't have that beginning, the book wouldn't be there.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, Allegra, about the idea that a lot happens to her, right? And yet it's a book that doesn't have a plot that's easy to describe, right? Mm-hmm. We talked a lot about this when we were working on it editorially, and we talked a lot about it with your incredible team at Dial. And I still remember this amazing moment when we first went in to talk to Dial about sort of how to position the book and how to think about describing the story to people. And we were like, well, it's really just the story of a girl growing up. It's just the story of a girl becoming a woman. And the amazing Evita Bashrad turning to us and saying, well, what could be a more important story than that?
Yeah.
And me having this realization, like, yeah, why am I making this a negative when it's not a plot heavy book, even though a lot happens.
Yeah.
But the heart of the story, the drive of the story is her growth and her awakening.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And actually, when I was writing it, I had moments where I was doubting, and I would be like, the story's too small. It needs more, more things have to happen, more plot, sort of. And Julie, you actually said to me at the time, what's small is what makes it special. I remember those words, like, and so just have faith in what it is, so that was really helpful for me.
Well, all I could think of was that old Nicholson Baker book, The Mezzanine, where it's just really just one ride on an escalator. So some of the best books don't need a plot. And you're right. To me, I didn't see it. I love coming of age stories, and this is, it's just such an important part of life, and sometimes we don't need the hurricane. So
it's true. I went to a New England Booksellers Association conference, and I was sitting at the table as one does, like at a bake sale, and the booksellers are coming over, and one of them said, sort of, they didn't know about the book, and this is back in September, and one picked up the book, and she's like, so tell me about the genre of this book. Is this mystery, suspense, horror? And I said, well, it's a coming of age book, so it's all of the above. Like, it includes all of the.
Sorry, my router, I got kicked off, but I'm back. I'm back.
I saw you. I knew you would come back. I knew you were back.
I'm back.
It's like I found something else interesting to do. Yeah, I also think it's so important to remind people that not all books about young people are middle grade or YA novels.
Yeah.
Because I feel like sometimes books get pushed nowadays when they're not, when the protagonist isn't an adult, and some of my favorite books, many of my favorite books, maybe most, I'm not sure, but have a kid at the center of the story. I need to talk about Climbing for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
What made you choose that as the first real love of her life? I have one lot. I don't ever post it things to look at, but I did because it was so interesting to me. She's being coached by Toby, and she says the close third narrator says,
Mm-hmm.
the third problem kills. It's weirdly tricky because the holds you think will work don't work at all. Your route looks right, but then you're stranded and there's nowhere to go. And oh my gosh, that's the book.
Yeah.
How did you come up with the Climbing?
Yeah.
I think it just really came organically out of her climbing up the walls and in the door frames. And then climbing is big out there. But one of the things that really interested me about climbing as her sport is it's one of those sports that sort of like surfing, and I grew up in Hawaii, so surfing was like that over there. It's not quite a commercial sport. It's like, on the one hand, the affluent people or the yuppie type people their kids will go to the climbing gyms and they'll compete on these teams. And there's a whole scene around that. And then there's the climbers like her dad, who are kind of like out climbing rocks outside, which is much more like a hippie kind of back to nature kind of climbing. And I was really interested in exploring both aspects of the sport, the competitive ones, in which those little girls on the team, it's almost as if they could have been ice skating, they could have been in ballet class, you know, like, and the parents treat it that way. And then at the same time, there's this very non-commercial, like everybody's sharing their food, their pot, their whatever, like hanging out in the woods. And then the other thing was, I was really interested in the way in which an activity can mean different things to you at different ages. So climbing when she's 9 is very different to her than climbing when she's 19. And also it's something that her dad did. So, you know, so that's where it all sort of came from. But, you know, something difficult, something that that she would have to struggle with. Something that, again, that as your body changes, you, like literally as you gain more weight, as you become a bigger person, climbing is very different. You're not a little monkey anymore. You're a young woman. Bouldering becomes different.
Moment. Yeah, that's such a poignant moment in the book where she's like, I can't do the things she used to be able to do. She's like, I can't believe I can't do this because I'm bigger. And she's so angry about it, right?
And that again is, girls go through that in gymnastics, in dance.
Yeah.
And she hates her weight, like literally hates her weight because she's pulling herself up, you know, like, and she reminiscences about when she was 8. Yeah. And that whole issue of like puberty, you know, what that does to you.
Yes.
And how that becomes negative in so much of sport. Yeah. You know, not that I make a big deal out of it, but again, it's just from her point of view, but you just see that happening to her and your heart kind of breaks for her a little bit at that time.
I think there's also the part where Mitchell is like, you do it because you love it, not because you're going to win. And she is like, what are you talking about? Yeah. Like, no. In the beginning, she's like, no, I'm doing it because I'm going to be number 1. And then over time, that evolves for her.
That evolves. A lot changes. I think at one point she thinks she hasn't won enough to feel empty yet. Because he's like, but you'll win all these prizes and then you'll feel empty. She's like, bring it on. I'm ready. You know, like,
yeah, I'd love to feel that empty.
Yeah, I'm ready to feel empty.
I love that your book is also a vindication of parents. Like she is like, her parents are stupid. She thinks her parents are kind of stupid. And and then, you know, as she grows, she doesn't have to have her own kids to realize, maybe some things they said made sense.
She understands things a lot better as she gets older. That is for sure. And she understands, well, a lot of it has to do with understanding her dad, but also her mom and what they went through and what it's like to be them. That again, sort of the opening of her heart, you know, that she appreciates them as she gets older.
Julie, do the next one because I'm gonna.
That's one of the amazing. I was gonna say, I think one of the amazing things about the book is that you can read it as a daughter and you can read it as a mother, right? Like you can identify with both, and you can see Courtney and be like, oh my God, you're driving your daughter crazy and you're making her crazy. And you're like, you feel like Sam and you're like, Mom, just stop. But you can also feel like Courtney and be like, Jesus, Sam, you're making me and Sam trying so hard here. Like, cut me some slack, man. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel for her mom. Her mom I see a little bit of my mom in her mom too. My mom was tough, like Courtney. It's that combination with Courtney. She's not mean. She's never mean or degrading to Sam, but she's tough. She has expectations. She's loving and very tough.
Expectations from her wanting for Sam to have more opportunity. She's like, you have to be in school so you don't end up like me. Yeah. Right? Where I didn't have enough choices. And Sam's like, I don't get that. Like, that just doesn't make sense to me because I'm young and that I don't identify, you know? And But you see how Courtney's mom is tough on her, and you're just like, it's the lovely cycle of mothers and daughters.
Yes.
I am curious to ask you, one of the things I was thinking about is you touch on a lot of things that I wonder, having had been able to read you through the years, like you touch on things that maybe you wouldn't have been able to write about in your earlier books. And can you talk about like how contemporary society and how what we write about has kind of changed, and what you write about, but what, you know, like over the years, and how that influenced, like what would this book would have been if you had written it 20 years ago?
I don't think I could have written it 20 years ago. Like I didn't, and I needed to be old enough. I needed to have a child. I needed to, you know, I needed that distance and that perspective in order to write this book. I don't think I could have done it. And also I would say that the books that I wrote 25 years ago, those books that you remember, I probably couldn't write them now. You know, it's people, just like Sam, the artist changes and the voice changes and grows and all of those things. So.
Well, I was just going to say, you were like kind of, in some ways, I thought of you doing like a little bit of a Benjamin Button, you know, in that you were so, when you were young, you could write these elderly people with such knowledge, such wisdom, and you know, they often outshone your younger characters. And now,
I felt more comfortable writing about older people when I was young, for sure.
and now
I have more sympathy for older people now. And for younger people, I should say, also.
For everybody, it's
you get older and you learn more. That's actually one of the really fun things about being a writer, as opposed to being an athlete or something. You know, you can come into your own in middle age, as opposed to like dancers who are like, I understand so much now, but my body is too exhausted to do it anymore. You know.
But I love what you said in your Lit Hub essay about, like, when you were a young writer, you had such specific ideas about what kind of writer you needed to be, right? And you needed to write this kind of story, and like, who were you going to be, like this person or that? That person. They were all these very serious men, interestingly.
That's
and
one
it
of the
feels like
ways.
that's really opened up for you.
Yes. I feel freer in a way, but you're drawn to what you can do, right? Like, so I was figuring it out, you know, like Sam, I was figuring it out. I think I have more freedom to be less conventional, if that makes sense. When my oldest son, who's 30 now, read this book, he's an economist, and he actually said his favorite part of his book was when Sam quit climbing, which I thought was so interesting, because he said, like, so many books are about like the triumph of the kid, like then she becomes a star, then she becomes like, she wins the thing, you know, and he loved that she quit because that felt real to him, you know. And to be able to sort of go against the cultural or the cliche, to undermine the cliche, has become more fun as I've gotten older. But again, more sympathy for Courtney. Also, you know, bad things have happened to me too. You know, when I was writing my early stuff, I was so joyful, like nothing bad had ever happened to me. I lost my mother very young, and you know, I began to understand grief, and that's part of this book as well. Understanding, and then reassessing somebody, understanding who they were later, working through that in your mind. That was an experience that I could draw upon in writing this book.
I wanted to just give a shout out for your driver's ed scenes, the driving test. That, just for one thing, some of the most frightening moments of my own life, and I think just about everyone. And it's just an example of how visceral this book can be. And I don't know what it is about driver's ed. I just read a new. There's a short story collection coming from Katherine Heine, and called, I don't even remember what it's called, but the best story by far, my favorite story, was The Driving Teacher. And so how did you decide what, you know, moments to including that one? But
well, one of the things about living in a place like Beverly is that your wheels are really important. It's not like New York City or even Cambridge, where, you know, my kids just could get anywhere they need to go on public transportation or their bikes. And so driving wasn't an issue for them. But if you're out there, having a car is really freedom. And it is a huge rite of passage to becoming an adult. So I felt like that was really important. And then also just being tested and failing. And I was interested in her mom's reaction to that, which is much like my mom was, sort of like, get back on the horse, like, or like that. Lots of morons know how to have driver's license, and so can you, like. My mom was like that. She had that kind of can do, like in the face of everything, like, believe in this and you can do it. Like, she was that kind of a mom, and which can be overbearing at times, but also wonderful at times.
Yeah.
I remember I was in graduate school when I had my first baby, and my mother came out to visit. I was like, I just finished my coursework for my PhD. And so what did she do? She didn't like sit around admiring the baby. She took me to the Stanford Shopping Center and bought me 3 suits. I was like, you know what? People don't wear suits in graduate school. And she goes, you'll need these for interviews. Look like you're going to finish your degree. And I mean, Courtney is obviously a different kind of person, but she has that that's the emotion in Courtney, it's sort of like, go back there. We'll go to a different driving test. Like, so it's as much about her mother's response to the driving challenge as Sam's terror and her response to it. It's a whole family thing.
I have a question for sort of both of you, and it's one of Emily's questions, and it's also from Judith, sort of. So a lot of people want to hear about the publishing experience and what was different. Emily talked about what was different about the experience, and then Judith talked about, the Jenna book club. Of course, you don't usually know about that while you're writing the book. You're like, unless you really have the can-do spirit.
Oh.
And then, of course, working with Julie and her experience, talk a little about, because you talk.
Julie, do you want to go first, or should I go? You go first.
I just feel incredibly lucky. I mean, I feel like we have this really, we were brought together by Allegra's editor and publisher and my mentor, Susan Campbell. And when she called me, because Allegra had an editor for her whole career. I mean, Allegra, you started publishing when you were like 18, right? I mean, you were so young. Mm-hmm. So Allegra had this incredible agent who passed away. And Susan had been her publisher for so long. And Susan was my mentor. And she came to me and said, Allegra Goodman is going to need a new agent. And I like freaked out. I was like, I don't even know if I can talk to her. I'm such a big fan. Like I don't have them here behind me, but like I have an entire bookshelf of Allegra Goodman books, like first editions, a galleys from when I was a bookseller at Shakespeare and Company, and her books in the 90s, late 90s, early aughts were coming out. So I kind of freaked out when I talked to her. And then I was like, maybe that was too much. Was it too much? I don't know. It was too much. But luckily, apparently it wasn't too much. I don't know.
No, I feel like Susan brought us together. And then Susan passed away tragically, really soon after we started working together. And I really feel like I'm so fortunate that we ended up together. I'm just so blessed to work with Julie. I was really in a spot where I was very much orphaned. I lost my agent and my editor, like they passed away within weeks of each other. It was very traumatic. I mean, people were like, it was like sitting Shiva, like people were condoling me, I mean, I can't even say, like, it was very hard. And having Julie there to anchor me, and also Julie, who had looked at this new book, which was so different from a lot of my previous work, and she was just so warm and embraced it immediately. Like, it wasn't a question for her. Like, she was just like, let's do this. I believe in this book. And at some point during the revision, I almost felt like she believed in it more than I did. Sometimes I was very frustrated writing this book, especially the second half of the book. And I used to call this book my problem child. In fact, I was not.
Well, what was?
Sorry,
You were not was amazing about Allegra was that you could give her feedback and she had no ego about it. So we did do some experimenting with expanding the story and contracting the story and ending the story in a different place. And we would talk about like, well, what about this? And would that work? And should we try this? And Allegra was always like, sure, let's try that. Let's try this. She was so, and I was just like, this is crazy. Cause like, she's so experienced and so talented and she's willing to hear out all my crazy ideas.
I loved it. I love getting the suggestions. I love that back and forth because writing is so solitary. It's great to have somebody like smart, who is like smart and committed, who wants the best for the book and is asking questions. And, so I was just like, and I was, I loved it.
Yeah. It was so fun. The person who really, I think, had the vision and the passion and had the questions was Whitney Frick, Allegra's editor. And she was also mentored by Susan. Susan had chosen her to inherit the Dial Press imprint. And when Whitney fell in love with the book and had this incredible vision for how to publish it, it really felt like Susan was like watching down.
It's incredible.
Like magically just brought us together. And, Whitney is one of those incredible, she wears both a publisher hat and an editor hat. Like she thinks like a publisher, but she feels like an editor.
Yeah.
And she saw the book for everything it was, and she didn't want to make it something different. She just wanted to make it the best version of Sam's story that it could be. And then her incredible team at Dial, just everybody connected with the book so viscerally. And I think it was really a beautiful publishing experience from my perspective.
It's incredible. It was absolutely incredible. I've never experienced anything like that. And Whitney's sort of joy in her work and her warmth, and just she's very open-hearted. And when she loved this book, it's just like what Julie said. It wasn't like I love it and I want it to be something else. It's like I love it for what it is, and which is like everybody's goal, like in their lives, Yeah. But also because she understood it at a really deep level. So I've been so fortunate. I can't even believe it. And how crazy, like we didn't know the book was going to end up at Dial, which is where I had been, we didn't know that. When Susan passed away, I didn't have a contract or anything.
Yeah.
So it just feels very meant to be.
It was very Bashert. And then to have Jenna fall in love with it. I mean, you can't, the incredible thing about Jenna is that she is a true reader. And she only picks the books that she herself falls in love with. She has a team who helps her find books and they recommend books, and everybody all over town is putting books in her hand. But she fell in love with Sam. And it was amazing to see her enthusiasm and her excitement over the book, because it's such a gift to be able to get a book like this on such a big platform and hopefully put it in the hands of as many readers as possible.
I think the Times just did a story like this is one of the main there's 4 book clubs for literary readers, and especially if you're not a superstar already, short of winning a big prize, and for a lot of authors that prize isn't, if you're writing a more, if you're not right in the taste of what judges want, this is it.
A lot of great attention for debut fiction, right? And I think Jenna has done an incredible job of really focusing a lot of attention on debut, but we're also on our end always talking about like mid-career writers. Like it's harder actually as you publish more, right? Because unless every single book has been a huge bestseller, then you have a track record. And that
people buy on track. It's always.
And people buy on track, and retailers buy on track, and reviewers are like, oh, that person again. Like I'm more interested in the new person that's all buzzy. And so that's another thing, like this idea that we are introducing Allegra's work to a whole new generation of readers. Like I remember reading her as a bookseller in 1999, but they're like young people who are just like, I don't know, 1999 must seem like 100.
They weren't even born.
They weren't even
They
born.
weren't even born.
Oh no, we were talking. When I was trying to describe the book to my fellow booksellers, I'm like, oh, none of you were born when I was reading this, but
Yeah.
but you can discover it now. I have a rule to read. I read one book that's old, that I consider old.
Yeah.
Oh, do you know what a bookseller considers an old book? 3 years.
3 years ago.
3
Yeah.
years.
Right.
Just so
Exactly.
old that it's backlist in paperback.
Right.
And that's a challenge for us because we're
No,
always
I'm
reading
so
things.
aware of that. And
Yeah.
it's crazy. And it's wonderful to have like young readers and to see that happening. I had an experience last night where I was at a bookstore, wonderful
Love it.
bookstore. I told Julie
Tell
about
us
this.
all.
Okay, I'll tell you all. So I was at, and there were these wonderful readers there. And they were older. I had young people in Cambridge, and these older readers had come to Brookline or lived in Brookline. And every question at the end of the reading was started with, I have been a fan of yours for many years. I've read everything that you've ever written. And, it's almost intimidating. I was like, oh my God. And then several of them did this. And at the very end, this young woman said, I have never heard of you. I have not been a fan of yours for many years. I've not read anything that you've written, but I saw Sam on TikTok and I decided to come and buy the book. It happened last night.
Styles marketing team is like, yes.
I was like, oh my God.
Somebody's opening a social media account with that discovery.
I was just like, then she comes up afterwards and I'm signing the book to her and everything. And I'm like, so glad you came and everything. And she said, and I said, that's so interesting that you saw it on TikTok. And she goes, I love TikTok because the algorithm knows what I like. It's like, okay, that's a little scary, but I'm very happy that the algorithm found Sam, So it's pretty fun. And it's also strange that, when I was writing this, never in my wildest dreams would I have thought about, I was thinking, will it get published, let alone like in the hands of a lot of people. And because it felt so sort of intimate and yeah, it's very interesting.
Well, I'm glad it's well beyond just being published. Let's just see. I'm going to ask, let's see, another question. Well, I would like to know, does your daughter still not read?
Oh, yeah. So my daughter does read. Yeah, she's decided she likes reading. She's just also very picky. And as a bookseller, you might appreciate this. She's an aspiring designer and she only buys books with exquisitely beautiful covers. She cares a lot about the cover of the book, the paper, the physical book.
So do we.
So that's very important to her. So, but she does read. She said that people at school, she's in college, and she said her friends ask her if she's read all my books. Some of her friends have read multiple of my books and their parents. And she told them she only reads the ones dedicated to her. So, like, okay.
Hilarious.
Yeah, she's a character.
We have I can't say who the author is. I think Julie will guess. We have a local author whose daughter is working at the store. And I asked her if she reads her books and she said, no, I'm not allowed to yet.
Oh, interesting.
We have like just a little bit of time left, and I would like both of you to talk about some upcoming books. I just want to mention, I will just give one thing. So I'm on in addition, as I say, I'm a completist. I've read all your adult books, fiction, and short stories and novels. I'm currently reading, I just finished Kathleen Shine's new book, Consular's Paradise. And she has, and now I've actually just went to the library to give them the Rebecca Mackay blow up for the book that I'm not supposed to say is the one she picked yet. Oops, nobody's supposed to know. But I took out 2 of her old books because there's still a few of her older books I haven't read yet. And I just want to say, Consular in Paradise has a Mamie, one of the characters, is 93 and lives in Venice, California, as does one of your characters. In one of your books.
Rose
So-
Markowitz.
Yes, Rose Markowitz. And I'm
Love
like,
Venice, California.
so I enjoyed that book a lot. now I would like to hear from you both about some books that you're excited about.
I wrote down some titles. So I want to give a shout out to Women Talking by Miriam Toews. I know it's been made into a movie. I like this book before I knew about this movie, and I think everybody should read it before they see the movie, because I think in principle you should do that. I'm sure it sounds like a really well done movie. I just thought this book was absolutely fascinating, and I know people who didn't care for it at the time, but I think she's so original. It's so interesting. It's women in this barn trying to figure out what to do after this terrible crime. Should they leave their super religious community? Should they stay and fight the men? I mean, I just thought, and it's written in dialogue. I thought it was so suspenseful and so fascinating. I also really enjoyed Emma Donahue's Haven, which is fairly recent, and Claire Keegan's Foster, which I originally read in the New Yorker as sort of a long story. And it's just like, you sit down, you can read it in one sitting, and it's such a beautiful book about a young girl, in fact, in Ireland, and who is from a very poor family, is taken in by her relatives. And then one last one, I have a nonfiction book to recommend, which is Lyndall Gordon's new book, The Hyacinth Girl, about T.S. Eliot's secret love, Emily Hale, who he wrote her over 1,000 letters, but had them sealed, and nobody was allowed to read them. They were unsealed in 2019, and biographer Lyndall Gordon went to Princeton and read all these letters. And this is the Hyacinth Girl of the Wasteland that he wrote about. She was his, and he tried to deny it later, but she was his true love. And she's an incredible biographer and scholar. So I recommend that to any poetry lovers out there.
Before we go to Julie, I just want to say, it was funny because I read books by, I haven't read the Hyacinth Girls author's books, but I've read other books by each of the people that you recommended. And in each case, I read the previous book to the book that you recommended.
Okay.
So I don't know what that means, but I just want to say that All My Puny Sorrows is one of my favorite books of all time. Which is also, she I mean, the world's foremost Mennonite writer, right?
She's
Because
great.
I don't think there's that many.
She's amazing. She's amazing.
Julie.
Okay. Forgive me for moving. I'm just trying to find the signal in this weird office that I'm in. So that's why I keep moving around. I am going to plug my own books because I'm an agent and that's what I do.
Part of the
books
deal.
that came out this fall that I love and want all your readers to read if they haven't already. Celeste Ng's Our Missing Hearts.
Oh yeah, I have it.
And so good. And Kevin Wilson's Now Is Not the Time to Panic. So both so wonderful. Books that are coming out this month that I'm really excited about. I very rarely represent nonfiction, but I have been working with this author for 6 years on this book. It's an incredible nonfiction book about the crafts and their escape from enslavement. It's called Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, and the author is Ilian Wu. And it's an incredible story about William and Ellen Craft, who escaped. Instead of going on the Underground Railroad, they went above ground. She passed as a white man and traveled with him as her slave. And they got to New York, and they joined the abolitionist circuit, and they eventually made it to England. And it's an incredible story. It reads like fiction. It's just amazing. And at the end of the month is a debut short story collection called Call and Response by Gota Atone Moeng. And she's from Botswana. And it's just an incredibly beautifully written story collection. I really knew almost nothing about Botswana. And it's one of those books where you feel like you really identify with so much of the relationships and the characters, even though the culture is so different than your own and the landscape is so different. But there's so much humanity to connect with. And I'm really excited about both of those books. So that's my
Now
list.
we are too.
Yeah, I can't wait to read
Yay! Thank you.
I wanted to let everybody know that we are I did remember to record. I don't think I messed it up. So we'll be sending the recording out to folks within a week, and we hope you'll share it on social media or whatever, wherever, if you have a TikTok account and you can have a video of you watching the program. I don't know.
Oh my God.
Thank you so much.
Here we
both of
go.
you,
We're gonna end up on TikTok.
for joining us
Thank you,
tonight. It was
Daniel.
Thank you,
such an
Daniel.
honor.
So lovely.
Thank you so
And as I
much.
said, as you said, maybe less than 26 years till the next time we meet.
Yes, please.
Yeah.